So this first question is from Allie. Allie said, "Hi, David. What do you suggest to do if a dog reacts to other dogs when he is in break free and sees a dog coming? Unlike the situation when the dog is in a come command while walking and doesn't react. In addition, please, if you could someday do a podcast or talk about the connection/importance between conditioning the e-collar and between e-collar correction. There are many, many opinions on this. Your professional opinion is important." So we'll see if we could break this down a little bit for you guys. So the first part of that question, so basically what they're implying is if you have a dog-reactive dog, and I get this question a lot in one-on-one lessons, right? So if you have a dog-reactive dog and you're doing a session with them, generally speaking, your dog is going to be in command a lot of the time, right? Your dog is either going to be in a come command, they're going to be heeling with you, they're going to be in a down stay, stuff like that. And those things, when we're working through some of this kind of stuff, help to kind of make the situation easier for the dog to be compliant in, because we're getting them focused on something. What we're trying to do by proactively putting a dog into, say, a down position or walking them in a come command past another dog is we're giving the dog direction and telling them, hey, listen, there's things going on in the environment right now that might be triggering to you, but I need you to stay focused on this thing. So we're taking 50% of their brain and we're focusing it on a task at hand, right? What that also allows us to do is it allows us to give a correction fairly firmly for non-compliance of a known command or a skill that we're asking the dog to do when they decide to no longer do that thing because they're busy reacting, right? So we're testing their compliance to us around a lot of different triggers, right? And again, by proactively doing it in the form of utilizing commands and stuff like that, we could hold the dog to a fairly clear criteria and help desensitize them to these different triggers. Now, one caveat that I kind of add to that for everybody is at some point when the dog is not in command, right, you are going to have to stop the unwanted behavior as well, right? So when we're doing lessons with people and we're working through this process, what I hear a lot is, okay, well, I'll take my dog for walks in training sessions, right? And in the training session, the dog does pretty darn good, right? They could walk by other dogs. They could hold downstays around other dogs. When I give active direction, the dog is pretty successful with things. But when we're not in a training session and we're going outside for a quick potty break, right? Or I'm walking my dog from my house to my car and they might not be in command. If they see another dog, they'll still react, right? So basically what this person asked is, in that situation, what do you do, right? To which I replied, I would just correct for the reactivity still. Yeah. Right? So obviously, and this is kind of a lot of the problem with certain force-free approaches, is when they say that your solution to a lot of the problematic behaviors that you're having is teach what they call incompatible behaviors, right? So a dog can, basically what that means is a dog cannot react at other dogs and hold a downstay at the same time, right? A dog cannot jump on your guests if they're holding a bed stay while guests come over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what we do is we use commands or incompatible behaviors in order to manage the dog's behavior, right? While we're working on certain goals with them, right? So in the case of reactivity, we use incompatible behaviors to ensure compliance around the trigger to desensitize to them while we work towards the goal of when the dog is just loose and free to make their own decisions around these triggers, they're less likely to react. And if they do, I could then clearly stop just that problematic behavior. But I've generally gotten it into a more manageable place at that point because I've practiced the dog being calm around that trigger enough times, right? So I would just correct for it is my answer. So let's say I'm going out for a potty walk and the dog isn't in a heel command, right? Or the dog isn't in a down state and they start freaking out. Well, you're still not allowed to freak out. So I'm going to tell you no and not do it. Same deal with if you're struggling with dog's arousal when guests come over your house. I might work a bed stay while guests come over the house for the first 15 minutes or so to allow the arousal to come down a little bit. But once I release the dog from the bed, if the dog goes to jump on my guest, I'm not going to tell them to go back to their bed. I'm going to clearly tell them to not do that thing, right?
Yeah.
So we just always have to ask ourselves what our goal is with the session that we're doing and what it is specifically that we're working on with the dog. Are we working on desensitizing and just kind of getting the dog's focus around something, or are we working on stopping an exact problematic behavior that you might be having, right? So that was basically my answer to that, is I would just correct for that behavior, right? Specifically, I answered, when the dog is not in command, reactivity is still a never allowed behavior, and I would still just punish for it, no different than I would punish for the non-compliance of a down command in the presence of the trigger, right? And the person actually replied back. They said, well, if he is in free, you don't prefer to give the dog a command like come, and if he doesn't adjust to that, correct? Which again is a normal question we'll get, is why wouldn't I just tell the dog come if they start reacting, right? So the example that I always give everybody is the goal is not do this behavior until you hear come, right? The goal is just don't do that thing. So the problem with if your dog is free and they go to jump on somebody and we tell them bed, right, is that they might be 100% compliant with that bed command in that moment. And what that's telling the dog in that moment is you could jump on people until I tell you bed. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the problem with that, and that's why we would prefer to just correct for that thing initially. So again, the commands in the presence of the trigger is the first step to help manage the dog around it, get the dog into a compliant state of mind around it, so we start patterning in proper behavior around the triggers. The next step, and this, again, it can be reactivity, it could be jumping on gas, it could be any problem behavior that you're seeing, right? Counter surfing, anything like that. The second step is allow the dog to be free to make their own choices, and then still hold them accountable for the specific thing you don't want them to do, right?
Yeah.
So the second part of the question, right, is can you do a podcast or talk about the connection / importance between conditioning the e-collar and between an e-collar correction? There are many opinions on this, and your professional opinion is important. So this is where you get into terminology is everything. Right? So what does conditioning the e-collar mean to myself and to other people, right? So what a lot of people think of when they think of conditioning in the e-collar is they think of using the e-collar at really, really low levels to get the dog accustomed to the sensation so the dog doesn't perceive it as a negative. That's what most people think it means. And I'll explain, like I've done in a couple of podcasts already, why that is faulty and why we don't like that, right? The goal is not that the dog likes the e-collar sensation. The goal is not that the dog doesn't perceive the e-collar sensation as aversive, right? Though there are trainers that will say that to the moon and back, I completely and utterly disagree with it, right? The e-collar is a tool you could use to either inhibit an unwanted behavior or teach a new behavior with by teaching the dog to either escape or avoid the sensation. Right? So again, terminology is everything. To me, conditioning the e-collar means we're using it in the form of negative reinforcement. We're correcting with the e-collar means we're using it as positive punishment. In neither of those cases is the goal that I should be using the e-collar repeatedly over and over again to get the dog used to the sensation. It's just the way I'm applying the pressure, right? So look at it this way, right? If I'm using the e-collar as a correction, or if I'm using it as positive punishment, so those two are the same thing, correction equals positive punishment, right? I am applying a stimulus on the e-collar that is at a high motivating level while the dog is rehearsing something that I don't want them to do to get them to want to avoid that correction the next time by not doing that behavior. The best example is my dog jumps on you. The second they jump on you, they get a high-level correction, and they associate jumping with that high-level correction, so they avoid that correction the next time by not jumping. So we've inhibited a behavior, right? Conditioning the e-collar or negative reinforcement, so conditioning the e-collar equals negative reinforcement, is simply teaching the dog to escape a pressure by doing something precise. So let's say I want to teach the dog to get onto that chair over there or get onto their dog bed over there or whatever it may be, right? I could apply continuous stimulation, right? Or continuous pressure with a leash or whatever type of aversive you're using, in this case, the e-collar we're talking about. So continuous stimulation that is still set at a level that the dog doesn't like, right? I get them onto the bed, and then I turn off the stimulation when the dog gets onto the bed, right? What this does is it teaches the dog how to escape the stimulation. Not avoid it, but escape it, right? So they feel stimulation, they get onto the bed, stimulation comes off. The repetition of doing that, the dog learns how to get onto the bed when they feel stimulation, so we could use that to pair a command to. So I could say bed, stimulation, get them on the bed, release stimulation, bed, apply stimulation, get them onto the bed, release stimulation, and through repetition of that, that is how you would train a command if you were using the e-collar to train the command. Obviously, the same process would apply if I did it with a food lure, right? I would say bed, food lure them onto the bed. They get their food when they get onto the bed, right? That is how you would teach a command utilizing the e-collar. Now, in a lot of cases, right, if we're using corrections with our commands, so positive punishment to enforce the command, sometimes it's easier if you've used negative reinforcement first to teach that command, because since they already have an association of the pressure turning off when they get on the bed, when they get corrected for not doing it, so if I tell them bed, they don't do it, and I tell them no and give them a correction for it, they're going to have a more clear association of what to do with that correction, right?
Yep.
So the goal is never that the dog likes the e-collar. The goal is that the dog learns how to either escape or avoid the e-collar so that you ultimately don't need to use it. And that happens because the dog doesn't like it.
Yeah.
Right? So that is the way that I view e-collar conditioning, and I always have. And the reason why I hate when people overcomplicate it, because what we fall into the trap of is we've brainwashed people, your average owner. We've brainwashed your average owner to think that the e-collar should be viewed as a positive by the dog, or that the dog shouldn't be nervous of getting a correction or anything like that because they have a bad association with them.
Yeah.
Right? And what that finds people into the trap of is never using levels that the dog cares about and making it completely pointless that they're even using the e-collar in the first place.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So all you need to do, I've said this a million times, right? But I'll say it one more time here. All you need to do is you need to ask yourself, am I teaching something with the e-collar, or am I stopping something with the e-collar? And if you're teaching something with the e-collar, your emphasis is going to be on teaching the dog how to escape the pressure, so using continuous pressure and releasing the pressure when the dog does the correct thing. If you are trying to stop something, your goal is going to be connecting a single consequence that the dog cares about to a specific behavior to create an inhibition of that behavior.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
That makes total sense.
Okay.
Need that Topo Chico now.
I need the Topo Chico. I got to hydrate here.
Yeah, it's just a weird. I mean, just the definition, like the term conditioning. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a confusing term
What
anyway.
does conditioning mean? Let's find out. You know me. I love looking up definitions. See,
Yeah.
I lost my mouse though. God,
Oh,
gosh darn it! All right, here we go. Let's find out what conditioning definition. The process of training or accustoming a person or animal to behave in a certain way or to accept certain circumstances, right?
yeah.
So even that is a little confusing, right? So it's not wrong, right? So you are training something, right? But the accustoming side of things, right, kind of implies that you're getting them used to something, which is not really the goal, right?
Yeah.
But you are training the animal to behave in a certain way or to accept certain circumstances, meaning, right, we are training the animal to accept the circumstances of you could escape this pressure by doing this specific thing, right? So I guess if you look at it that way, conditioning would be accurate, right? But this also can be interpreted many other ways, right? Which is why you get into many different types of conditioning you have, right? You have counter conditioning, you have classical conditioning, you have all sorts of different conditioning. So,
Yeah.